Hello there. Welcome to our new live coding session brought to you by KMP Labs. Today we are going to talk about modeling by example. And by that, I mean exactly what Everset, Constantin, says. Oh, I have to share my screen, maybe. I have to go on Firefox, I forgot that. So let me share my screen using Firefox because Chrome doesn't work. That's too bad. So, are you hearing me? Should be okay now. Holy crap. What the fuck is happening with the sound? So, can you guys hear me? There's so much latency. I don't know what to do. Is there a big latency for you? Holy crap. And it's the same problem. Or maybe it's just me. And you can maybe I should try only with Firefox. Anyway, I will remove my headphones because it's horrible. My sound is horrible. So we will start. So I have prepared a small, I bootstrapped a small project, modeling by example, which contains, for the moment, only composer.json. I required bhat and PHP spec. I did that using Richard Miller's very good bhat spec extensions. So there's one extension for bhat and one for PHP spec. You will see later what it does. What I did too is configure my bhat.yaml to have two suits, one for the domain model and one for the UI. We will see later how to do that. As an advice, I try to find a good feature set that fits some good modeling example, and I ended up using a planning applications. So here's a feature. So in order to make some planning and ensure my tasks don't overlap in time, I can organize tasks, add tasks at a given time, and the application should forbid me to add a new one at the same time. So I can't promise two things and do none of them. So you can see that my scenario are quite abstract, like tries to say our good friend Everset. So that's where it comes from. Modeling by example, it comes from Everset's blog, who described in a very interesting blog post his tentative to use examples and Gherkin scenarios to implement some to model his domain. So I took an example which is similar to one of his presentations he made. So here is the basic idea we will try to dive into today. And he says that scenarios should be quite abstract. They shouldn't take some UI specific things like I click on a button or I go to this page, because this is just an implementation detail and it doesn't, it's just one of the way to implement the domain model. So we try to abstract from all those things and make our scenarios quite abstract from the UI, as I say. And I go even a step further by removing all the details that doesn't really add some value to the scenario. For example, we could say that a task is named something and is applied to some user and is planned for a given time. So what I did is I remove all the details, like what is a task is not really important in this scenario. The important thing in the scenario is the fact that you can add it. And second scenario is the same. The fact that there is a task named something doesn't really matter. What is important is that if I add a task at a given time and I plan another task at the same time, it shouldn't be possible to add it. So giving a name, giving a date, a time, and all those examples are, to my mind, not really important, because what matters is really the feature by itself. So I already see possibly some problem with that, is that modeling by example is by definition giving some concrete example. But I also see the thing as being, as the scenario is an example of to use the application, not, it doesn't have to be really the naming of the things, which is an example. So anyway, that's my features I want to start with. So for the sake of demonstration, I will just not start with all the scenarios. I will command them. So that, oh, that's funny. Funny. Anyway. bootstrapping this thing. So how to do that? I asked Beat to execute my features by using suite. So -s is the suite domain, and you can see that he says, okay, there is no step definition associated to some step. So I will try to ask him to add it to the feature context class I created already. So to that, I append snippet. And here we are. It created the associated steps definition. Here you can add it all the moment, which is logical. If we execute them, it says, okay, we should write a pending. We should write a definition for that. So let's start by an example given an empty planning. So what could it look like? We try to discover our domain model. So we will make some mistakes, find that our first implementation is not correct enough. But for the moment, the minimal amount of code we need to make this step pass is simply storing a planning in a new planning variable as a new planning, right? It's a planning object. Facilitate the bootstrap, I will give the full qualified namespace. So I have an app namespace, and it's app planning, saying our class is app/planning, right? Let's try again. So beat-s domain. And here we have the Richard-Miller extensions that help us to bootstrap our classes already. So that's great because it didn't find an app planning class. So yes, we want to create it. Do you want to run this PHP spec run command right now? Yes, I want. But of course, it doesn't really help. So yes, we create it, and you rerun the PHP spec. So in exactly one step, we created the app planning class and the corresponding spec. So if we execute it now, we can see that there is a green first step, which is quite great. By writing only a single line of code, we can see it created src app planning, so an empty planning class, and the corresponding spec. Oops. For the moment, just added the empty skeleton of a spec. So if I run this PHP spec run, which I have an alias named R, we already have a first step and a first unit test that passes, and a first step definition. So by only using a single line of code, which is quite funny. Let's try to look at the second step definition. So I plan some task at a given time. So at hour. So for that, what are we going to do is we take the planning or let's give it a name even more explicit. You can see that the English sentence maps quite correctly to our code, our real public API of our classes. So let's try that. And we give it the time. We could also try to give him a .time object or something. I don't know. We can see that later. We execute bhut again, and you can see, okay, there is no plan method. Do you want to generate an example for the plan method? Yes, I want. What kind of method is that? It's an instance method, so 0. Do you want the run command? Yes, I want to run it. It detects there is no plan method, so PHP spec try to generate one for us. And here we are. We already have Oh yes, there is no task yet, but let's look at what it did by this first step. What it did is SRC app planning. Oops, I have a problem with my planning object. No, we can look at the spec. I load the file. So you can see it added an example for my method plan here. And if we run it again, we create the task object. We answer yes for each of them. Oh yeah, I forgot to put a real namespace on it, so I'm sorry. I should put here /app/task. Let's name it like that. Again. So what the heck is happening? Oh yeah, that's because there is already. Not sure why. Because there is a task, namespace app, that's good. And is there a spec for that? Oops. Spec app task. Yeah, it should be okay. So is there a problem? Oh yeah, so I think it's okay now. So we want to generate the app task at our method. Yes. What kind of method is that? It's a named constructor. So we run PHP spec. That's funny. That's something I don't understand. Feature context task was generated but could not be loaded. Maybe I have some. Yeah, that's because of this. But okay, that's because of that. Let's generate yes, name constructor. Okay, better now. So let's look at our SRC app task. That's funny. Let's create it by hand. Public static function at hour, giving the hour, and create a new task. We'll pass it as a constructor argument for the moment. CTOR hour. So let's try like that for the moment. And right now we have implemented our second missing argument 1. Oh yeah, that's logical. So if we go on this by it is initialized the case if I give it as first be constructed with, let's say, 1. So steps passes. So maybe no, it's okay. So let's run again our behat scenario. So we already saw we implemented our second step definition. Let's look at the third one. Features, context, domain. So what is this third step in order to verify is our thing is okay? So what does it mean? It should be accepted. It means there should not be any exception, maybe. And that we can get it back from the planning object. So let's try to look at the planning. Is accept for this task. True, right? So library, which is accepted to be true. Does behave to us. So it doesn't see any is accepted method. So let's say it's an instance method. Run the spec. Is accepted is not found. Create it. So right now, okay, there is no this task. We didn't do it this way. So let's name task. And let's execute it back. So right now we have a false assertion, failed expectation. So it should be accepted, but it gives us null, which is logical because if we look at the, there is nothing here, nothing in the plan method neither. So we will start by making a prop equal an exact in array again, needle in a haystack. So we ask for task. I have my Vim as always. And I think it's true or strict. Yeah, strict, which means we want to check identity. So using the strict comparison operator. So let's execute it back. And here we are. Our first step is passing. So let's try to. So and we run PHP spec also. So is accepted. Yes. If we look at the plan, we should give him some new tasks, something. New. Let's say 1. If a plan. And here is something Jeremy told me to talk about, and he's totally right. Totally look like our expectation from the feature context class, and that's interesting because maybe I am missing something here. Totally look like Behat. So what did I should use statement. So if we this, it totally looks like a unit test, right? I mean, it's the same expectations. We make the same assertions. So maybe we're missing something. Maybe our feature context class should expect something else from our planning object. I'm not exactly sure what to check, but I think the reason is because for the moment our specs are very near our one object. So once we use a graph of objects which collaborates and all, we will detach from the unit test. But because what we are testing exactly one class, it looks like the unit test of this exact same class. So that's maybe why the expectations are so similar from BHAT and PHP spec. So that's because our domain model is maybe too simplistic for the moment. So once we have this first accepted step, it's green. We can already see emerging some nice things. Is our API is quite simple. It's self-documenting. So the method here, there is no isset or some technical jargon. We exactly use the name that is described in our feature file, and this, and I should emphasize this, is that our scenario here are come from the communication or the discussion with our customer. So we are sure what the heck happened. We are not using some technical vocabulary, and we don't have these translation costs that Konstantin talks about, and maybe others. We use the same vocabulary, and our public API of our classes use the same vocabulary. So that's quite interesting. That's ubiquitous language, this well-known same vocabulary, and it will help us to avoid making our, as a developer, to translate what the client says. So that's a very good thing usually. But at least it involves, it's a crucial step in the development, is to write the scenarios, right? It's to discuss, not even write the scenarios, but to discuss the feature and see emerging vocabulary, a shared language. That's the most important thing. That's how you resolve the problem. It may seem obvious, but most of the time it doesn't happen like that. So you should take a lot of time discussing with the customer, simply, be it with a Gherkin scenario or whatever else. The most important is the communication and the discussions that emerge from this. So let's start with the second scenario, because I know time goes crazy. It's already half an hour. So now we can repeat. We can repeat, and we will see that we maybe need to refactor something thanks to our second scenario. So again, we will append the snippets, the missing snippets, and we can see, okay, so we will need to write the pending definition. So we go back under our context class, domain. I don't know why it's so slow. Okay, the domain, and it's it. Yeah. We can see that there is new pending exception. So maybe I should commit this already. Yeah. Okay, no, I won't commit this because it's not very important to commit, but we should have committed once our first scenario was passing. Anyway, we start the second scenario. So given a task is already planned for hour. Let's name it hour again. Maybe we will see later, but it could be like hour and minutes or a day or something. We will see later if it needs to be refactored. But we shouldn't think of anything else. If the client says hours, we stick to hours for the moment. So a task is already planned for hour. What does it mean? It means that we have a planning. Add the use statement so that I don't have to type the full qualified namespace anymore. So new planning, and this planning already has a task plan for. So plan looks like the first one, right? And maybe and put it again like that. Task. Not really important to have it, but anyway. So here we have our first given steps of the context in which the scenario is run. It states that we already have a task at this time. So we do it. We plan our first task. And then we say, I plan some other task at the same time. What does it mean? So at the same time, that's an interesting thing, is that in fact we should have called our and other step. So much thing. So here I plan some other task at the same time. So simply repeating. Oops. It's this planning. So in fact, I'm repeating the same line because it's approximately the same. So we just put a new task, but at the same time. So it's another instance at the same hour. Let's try to do at first. Oh, it's a namespace. I have it as my extension image. Still ask me for a thing. Did I add it? Yeah, I added it. Feature context task. Not sure why. Oh yeah, cache or something. So our first spec definition, step definition are working. So we should implement the last one, then it should be refused. What does it mean to be refused? So that's maybe throwing an exception or something. And here I'm starting to see there is a problem because when we execute this, it should fail, but we should detect it here. So maybe we should do it like that. Try. Well, we will see later. We will see later. First, we will implement the exception throwing in the plan method. So plan a task here is first verify somehow that there is no task at this time. So how can we do that? We can maybe for each dumb version, but tell me in the chat or wherever else. Maybe inside the group chat here. Hi, ask any question. Or maybe there is this QA thing that we can use. No, it's disabled. Okay. Anyway. So for it, this task as task, if for a task, well, variable collision, or a task. Let's try to find a method name for is planned has same hour or something like that. Existing task. we throw an exception. Throw new exception for the moment, which is a dump exception. And now we have to implement it again, to execute it again. And okay, has same hour does not exist. We created, it's an instance method. We run it. Okay, step passes. And let's go on the task. It moved because it has a new method. So has same hour than, it should be than. Well, okay. Task. Equal. So hopefully this will work, even though hour is a private property because we are the same class. Maybe it can work. So let's try. So you can see there is an exception. So behat, as soon as we see an exception, it says that the step fails. So that's why I wanted to put a try statement here. Try. This is planning plan at the same time. And if it catches an exception, it's good. So we don't do anything. So we return. And otherwise, we throw a new exception, saying it shouldn't be accepted. So because it catches an exception, it's good. Here we are. We are implementing correctly the steps. And you can see that, again, our public API is quite clean. There is no technical jargon anyway. So, of course, it's a bit simplistic, but at least our public API is nice and all. And we can see that this works. So it's always good to use encapsulation, like to encapsulate the internal state of our classes to their knowledge only. So the task object knows it has an hour inside, but the external world shouldn't have to know there is an hour thing. That's why we don't even need we could have check this equality of hours using a getter function get hour, but it would have licked the state of the object on the outside. So you could access the internal state from the outside, which is never good. But we could have did that. We could have did that, yes. Hour. And we could have compared here, instead of has same hour, we could have say if task hour equal existing task get hour. But we can see this is more clear. And second, we don't leak the internal state, which is a very good thing. So no getter, no setter. And for the moment, we didn't use any of that, so which is a great thing. We only used a static constructor, meaningful getters or meaningful hazards, which totally fit the English sentences we wrote, which is a great thing. So let's look at the last, it should be refused, the last thing. Oh, wait, I did that on the wrong thing. We return, otherwise we put it as an exception or something. Exception. This, what is it? Succeeded. I'm sorry, I didn't code it correctly. Succeeded equal true, for example. And here we expect so this succeeded equal false, so that we are sure it exists, except this succeeded to be false. theoretically, it should be okay, right? I think. Yeah. So that's how I delegated the refusal or not to the next step. But it's a bit hackish to do that. I'm not sure I wrote it correctly, or anyway, it works. So let's look at the last one, which is interesting, and will maybe give us more example of domain-driven design and stuff. So I should be proposed an alternative. So that's surely a good idea, but it may be complicated to implement, right? And maybe we'll see that there is a need for persistence somewhere, because for the moment we don't persist the thing, or application or program is side effect free. There is nothing persisted, there is no side effect, there is no database that change or anything. But we will see later that we surely will need one, right? So I should be proposed an alternative. So how could we code this thing? So we should say that this planning propose to a task. So finally, we should maybe have this task stored somewhere, or we could also create a new instance, but we will reuse it. So this task. Run it again. There is this short loop pattern we see. Propose alternative 2 does not exist. What is it? It's an instance method. We want to run. Yes, I want to run. So our unit test fails because we didn't look at so much, but it should have say more than new 1. Because it's just the same 1. So we constructed this task at 1, and we ask if it's the same. So it's run. So problem of namespace. Alternative. So, yes, it's an instance method. Okay. I go on the spec because fortunately I wrote there. Okay. So propose alternative to some logic. So by maybe iterating over all the tasks, a bit like that, and find next hour which is not taken or something. But this might be quite an interesting algorithm, but we don't have much time for that. But imagine we surely need some kind of complicated algorithm. I don't know yet how to do that, but what is sure is it should be maybe moved to a collaborator or something. So maybe for the sake of the example, we should ask our collaborator, like alternative finder or whatever, find, I don't know, for the task. And maybe our alternative finder does not need to know that we are talking about task. you maybe just have to know about the hour, so leak out the state of the task and give the hour or something like that, or the that time maybe. So whatever to that time or get that time, I don't know. But we could extract our complicated algorithm inside its own class and inject our finder inside the constructor somewhere. And but this is maybe another topic, right? So maybe it's too complicated. But that's the idea. We don't have much time for that. Propose alternative to task. So we return Dora task. Get our here it's a little bit dumb, and we don't have the yet. I will add it finally. So it's a dump implementation, but you see the idea is this thing could be extracted to a collaborator, we inject it in the constructor. So the construction of our planning object will be complicated, will be more complicated, but it will be easier to unit test and to implement, so and to maintain and to change the algorithm when we see it's not efficient enough. So that's the idea. So is our proposed alternative 2, we forgot this. It's a dumb example, but again, we are not here to make it very, very nice, just a presentation. So is BAT learning okay? Well, it seems okay. What's next? What's next? So force 2 tasks to overlap. So I thought about that. I don't know what happened with my file when I commented it. It's crazy. Oops. Anyway, so maybe we shouldn't implement this one because it's maybe I wanted to show you maybe a new one, which is how to make it comply with the UI. And one of the step is saying that we should be able to visualize the task in a kind of calendar way, tabular, and this could be part of the UI. So how to implement? So at first we will implement it. I will. Sorry. One. So domain happens. It goes so fast. We have 10 minutes left. So we need the steps. So let's features, context, domain. And failing, my Vim is a little bit shitty. That's it. Given a pretty busy week, so that's a funny thing. So the given is quite abstract, very abstract, but it's just kind of oops. It looks like this. We create a planning. We don't care about the hour, but we plan task at 2, at 3, at 4, something like that. And this is a pretty busy week. We already work for 4 hours. That's far too much, right? I asked for a recap, and it should have I should have a tabular visualization. So I implement this. So what is a plan for recap? So I ask for recap, so we use the planning and name it recap or late or whatever. Nice variable which is recap equal visualization. So let's write it as is. So $this to have type array. So it's a very simplistic, but anyway. So recap is an instance method, and we got null because is not yet implemented, but it's return towards this tasks for zone, right? So expected an instance of array, but got array. Okay, so to have type does not seem to work. Get type. So this was good. Oops. It's to be. And here we have a tabular visualization of our form, of our task. But if we wanted to test the same using the UI, so we had the Jamel also has a UI suite which only look at scenarios which are tagged with the UI and will execute scenarios against a second feature context which is especially made for the UI. We won't have time to do that, but that's when we should introduce a framework like Symfony, but not before. We can see that right now we didn't have any framework, any doctrine, any whatever. We have pure domain model. But as soon as we ask to have a UI or some persistence, that's when you should introduce doctrine or Symfony or whatever else suits your needs. But not before. And this thing will only be a glue or a way to use your public API you wrote during this domain modeling, and not before. So if you look at, let's, oops, TRS domain append snippets. So, but this time for the UI. So again, we have to implement the scenarios, but this time inside the UI feature context, which sits right aside the domain, and which has approximately the same steps. But if you look at our planning.feature, and this form should contain like 2 fields at a time and the task to do, so like the name. And the second one would be the calendar visualization using HTML or whatever. And that's where we should use Mink or something. Surely Mink. And by that, we surely will use min context or row min context and use Selenium or browser kit or whatever, but not before. We should not use min context right out of the box to test directly our domain model because it's so slow and it doesn't fit the pyramid of tests paradigm. So we should only have a few UI tests, a little bit more of integration tests. That's what we do with Behat, and a lot more of unit tests. And that's what we have currently. If you look at PHP spec, we have 8 examples. And in Behat, maybe it's not very, but at the end, you will have more unit tests that you have of functional tests or BHAT, and even less tests that test the UI. So it's approximately true. We only have 3 scenarios, but we have 8 examples. Okay, let's say it works. Let's say we approximately fit the testing pyramid. But yeah, you guess it. When I plan some task at something, it's approximately looks like I will write some meta code because we don't have much time. We have 5 minutes left. But it's surely with like Mink, go to page or whatever API, go to / task add. There is this Mink field field the hour and the name and stuff like that. I think you got it. And it should be accepted. It surely says. So here we submit the form, of course. Very abstract. And this Mink get page should contain or something like that. UI details inside the feature context class and not inside our scenario, because if we wrote here, instead of that, we wrote then I should see how you have tested that against your domain classes. You couldn't. Then I should see success. You see what I mean? And I should be redirected to. And this is to me the wrong way of testing your domain, right? Because it's a right way to test your UI, but it's better to test first domain logic and hide the UI details inside the Mink context, which yeah, the Mink context. And here you can also verify it should be redirected or something if it's important for the UI, but it's not important for the domain logic. Be redirected to something is just a technical detail or a technical problem of HTTP and HTML and browser. It has nothing to do with domain modeling. So it should be redirected or something. But I think you can see for now. But you can see that it simplifies greatly the steps definition or the scenario you write. You don't have to think HTML or HTTP or stuff like that. It's hidden inside the context classes, which is a great way to hide implementation detail. And you can, it's incredibly faster to test the domain and then the UI, because you can see regression test very more fastly, quickly. And also, you can know what went wrong, because when you only have Mink assertions, if something goes wrong, it could totally be because you made a HTML syntax error and your JavaScript didn't load or whatever else, but it has nothing to do with domain logic. And if you make a regression inside your domain logic, you will know very fast, compared to Mink only steps. So that, I think that's a huge win. So unfortunately, we didn't have time to introduce persistence. I would like, but I think you will. If we had like one or more, we would have seen that we should have bootstrapped Symfony somewhere, not inside directly our src folder app, and this is our domain, but we should have a src/Symfony, which uses the app / something classes, and it would have been a separated folder, a separated project, if you wish. And that's separation because domain logic and infrastructure, because that's Symfony is just an infrastructure, it's an implementation detail, and it uses your domain classes to map them to forms and HTML views or JSON API. And that's a good way to decouple your logic from the framework. And what else? Also in persistence. So you can see that the planning here surely should have persistence somewhere in order to hide the to store the tasks somewhere in the database or something. And this is also an infrastructure problem. It shouldn't leak directly inside your domain logic. And by that, usually you use some repository abstraction. So in order to get a task, you ask the repository, and this repository happens to be a Doctrine one. But using a dependency inversion, you apply an interface of yours inside the Doctrine repository instance. And it means you can like type in your interface methods instead of the Doctrine specific one, and you have nicely named repository method. Like instead of using find one by and create query builder every time, you use get the tasks for this hour, which is naming, or whatever is a task already existing, which internally use the query builder and DQL if you wish, or whatever else. It also means that if you have one repository implementation for Doctrine, you could have one for MongoDB, and it implements the same interface of yours. So it's very easier, and you decouple from the persistence. And again, you can see we didn't have to persist anything in order to test our logic. Of course, we should have integration tests that verify that our query builder makes the correct SQL statements behind the scene or somewhere. But it's not mandatory to test your domain logic. And you can see that we made a nice public API without using any of that. So that's all, folks, for my huge monologue. I hope you enjoyed it. It's already 2 p.m. So for once time, I think I didn't explode the timer, which is good already. I hope you heard me, because I'm not sure mine works very well. And I think that's all. If you have questions, don't hesitate. And voila. I see there is some tweets. Oh yeah, Alexandre. Glad you looked at it, you watched, and hope you enjoyed. So see you guys to the next time. I don't know what we will talk next time. Maybe a second version of this, where we will see the Doctrine and Symfony integration. Anyway, see you next time. Bye-bye.